here at the invitation of David Shaw, who is immediately to his right. David is a member of the advisory board at the Center for Public Leadership here at the school, as well as has been a fellow there, and has been very active in the life of the school over the last couple of years. David made his mark in business, he was a management consultant for several years and built a company, a $600 million company, which he then, you must have sold that, didn't you, David?
No, I just retired.
He retired. But as you can see, he retired early. And he then came to the Kennedy School, and he's now, in addition to his ties to the Kennedy School, has got a venture partnership he's founded in New York with private equity investments in a number of different fields, including healthcare, and has gotten to know Roy Vagelos. I don't know the background of that, but I'll leave you all to that. Let me give you a word about our speaker, if I might, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to him. Please understand, accept my apologies. I've already apologized to Mr. Vagelos that I have a class and core curriculum to teach very shortly, and I'm going to be rudely leaving in the midst of this. Please understand why. Roy Vagelos is in many ways a legendary figure in American business, as he left a reputation, a trail of someone who was an enlightened CEO, who served not only his company well, but served the country well, served the world well, and during the time that he was the CEO and chairman of Merck. He's recently written a memoir of his life. It's called a autobiography called Medicine, Science, and Merck, which he co-authored with Louis Columbus. And I just want to say a few more words, because if you leave it there, you do not understand the full measure of the man. Roy Vagelos was someone who came to this country as the son of Greek immigrants. His grandfather, he was deeply schooled in Greek values right from the beginning, and they go back to early Greece, which I always admire, because his grandfather named his sons after memorable Greeks. One was named Herodotus, another was named Homer, another was named Thucydides. So you can see in his father's name is Herodotus. Roy is the Americanized, as I understand it in your book, Herodotus. It's P. Roy Vagelos, and the P stands for Pindar, the Greek poet. So this is a young man who was imbued with the ancient Greek values from the day of his birth. His father opened a deli in Westfield, New Jersey, where young Roy Vagelos made ice cream and served up sandwiches. From there, he worked his way and found his way to the University of Pennsylvania as a student, graduated from Penn and went on to Columbia as a medical student, came here to Mass General for his residency, went on, he was a biochemist, and he was also cardiology, I'm sorry, I should know the cardiology, because he connected up the two. Went on to the NIH, and from there became a professor at the University of Washington, St. Louis, in their medical center. Became a notable figure in the field, wrote over 100 articles in medical journals, refereed journals. So he became he had by that time been mastered from doctor and become a scientist. And then went on from there to Merck in 1975, and within a few years became the CEO of the company, where he had 9, as I say, notable years in which he was looked upon as one of the most enlightened of America's business leaders. And we were recalling then in 1992, young candidate Bill Clinton went to Merck and to campaign with Roy Vagelos because he sought his support. It was a badge of honor to have Roy Vagelos be there at his side, because he was viewed that way within the corporate world. We commend this book to you. I think your enthusiasm will go up as you hear Mr. Vagelos speak. You'll have a chance, if you wish, to sign up for the book when you leave. And I think it's a mark of the man that all of the profits from this book go into scholarships. Remains very active at the University of Columbia University Medical School, and he is the chairman of the board at the University of Pennsylvania. So he's deeply committed to education and research on a continuing basis. And much of what he did with HIV/AIDS and other areas is now looked upon, as I say, with great admiration. With that, Roy Vagelos, thank you for coming.
Thank you, David. I was spent 2 years in Boston at the Massachusetts General Hospital a very long time ago. It was 1954 to 1956. And this morning I jogged outside on this side of the river, on the Cambridge side of the river, and was able to look on the hill and see almost see the apartment. But I wouldn't see the apartment per se. You might be able to see the house because it was at the top of the hill on Walnut Street. Our apartment was in the basement, and it cost $100 a month. I mentioned that we had windows only at one end, the back end of the apartment. So when it snowed, when it started to snow in the early winter, the window wells would fill up, and we would have no light at all for the entire winter. So it was interesting. It's interesting to be back on a nice sunny day. David called me last night. I'm sorry, he sent me an email listing a whole bunch of questions that I should answer for you all. And at that time, I wanted to change and consider changing my entire talk. And I did. I rewrote the talk, but I'll use that talk at MIT later this afternoon. And I'm going to give you the original talk because he told me something else this morning which reoriented again my thought. So let me tell you about what we did at Merck, because it is really interesting from your point of view, and you are heading hopefully into leadership positions in public service. That's correct. That's what it's all about. Let me tell you some things that we did, because as David said, I was something like 19 years in research and teaching between the NIH and Washington University in St. Louis. In 1975, I was invited to go to Merck to head up the research laboratories. And I hadn't really thought a lot about it, but I was taken with the idea that perhaps the kind of research that I was doing at Washington University, which was being done by many people, biochemistry, could be completely focused on drug discovery. And so I moved with a small group of people to Merck and tried to convince the group that the traditional research for drug discovery could probably be superseded by applying biochemistry to it. And the traditional way of doing research was to set up an animal model that would have a disease. It could have an infection, it could have heart disease, it could have kidney disease, and then the chemist would make randomly chemicals, and they would be fed to the animals to see whether there would be an effect to improve the condition at that time. And that was rather classical in the industry up till that time. We said, look, what we should do is select specific proteins, molecules in individuals and humans that might be involved in the disease process. And these molecules could be either enzymes or surface receptors or ion channels. And we would concentrate our efforts there and see what we could learn. And I will give you an example, and this example was carried out by a friend who came with me, both initially from NIH, but then came to Washington University, and then moved to Merck with me. And this was to attack what at that time was known as the cholesterol hypothesis. And this cholesterol hypothesis was the relationship between high blood cholesterol and coronary heart disease and death from heart attacks. Now, the hypothesis was based on a number of observations. Number one, that the plaque that blocked the coronary vessel, the coronary artery, was filled with cholesterol. So that was a clue, and that was an old clue. Also very impressive was epidemiological information that had accumulated over about 20 years, which said that if you look across the globe and look at people, look at places where there's a high incidence of death from heart attacks, there tends to be very high blood cholesterol. And places such as Japan, where there are very few deaths from heart attack, the blood cholesterol is very low. So the differences between Japan and Finland, for instance, are huge. Very low in Japan, both cholesterol levels and death from heart attack. In Finland, cholesterol levels that are sky high, and death from heart attack 14 times higher incidence, 14 times. So incredible difference. And if you go across the globe, you see a straight line relationship between the levels of high blood cholesterol and death from heart attacks. And so that was a clue. Now at that time, a number of scientists had figured out how the cholesterol is made in the body. And the majority of the cholesterol in your body is made by your body. It's not taken from the diet. You can starve yourself for cholesterol, and many of you will get a very almost insignificant reduction in the blood cholesterol. So most of the cholesterol is made in the body, and the people who worked on the way the body makes cholesterol figured out that there are about 20 sequential steps, but one of them is slower than all the rest, the slowest one, and therefore it controls the rate of the final product. So if you have a sequence of 20 reactions, and one of them is very slow and is also under biological control, that's the one you should attack if you want to slow down what is happening at the end. And that particular spot was what is called the HMG-CoA reductase. And Al decided that this is where he would attack, and tried to make a drug by finding a chemical that would react with that molecule and slow it down, an enzyme inhibitor. And so he set up two sources, one looking at soil microorganisms as a source of such a chemical, and another one, the other source, of course, was to get the Merck chemists involved to try to design an enzyme inhibitor or something that would block the functioning of this enzyme. Well, it wasn't long before Al came up with an enzyme inhibitor from the soil microorganisms. He came rather quickly. He named it lovastatin. That was the first statin that was eventually got onto the market anywhere in the world. But as goes on in all fields of research, there was a tremendous amount of competition. Many companies were working on the same enzyme looking for inhibitors, and a Japanese company was ahead. The scientist there was Akira Endo, and we learned that he was ahead. The Merck compound was shown in animals to be safe and to reduce blood cholesterol, and specifically the low density lipoprotein, like no protein, like no inhibitor ever tested before. And so it was very exciting. It was safe enough to go into the clinic, and at the same time we learned that the Japanese compound, which was called compactin, had gone into the clinic and was ahead of us. And so we were racing along, and that's natural, that was okay. And one day at a meeting, when we were all together being very happy about the progress we were making, we had a call from Japan, which notified us that the clinical studies in Japan had been stopped. They had been stopped because there was a problem, and the rumor was that the compactin was causing cancer in animals. And so they had stopped, the company there, which was Senkio, had stopped their studies. And so we immediately, that day, stopped all the studies of the Merck compound, which was lovastatin. I should tell you that our chemists had never given up, and they had converted lovastatin to simvastatin. So there were two statins at Merck, and while the toxicologist that was to work to see, in fact, what kind of cancer would this compound be causing, compactin, was lovastatin also going to cause cancer because it was working on the same enzyme? Was the problem that when you inhibit that enzyme, you're going to have cancer as a consequence? Or was it idiosyncratic to that one compound, compacted, and other HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors would not be a problem. We didn't know for a couple of years, but we studied all forms of animals to see if we could find cancer causation associated with lovastatin, and there was none. So after a couple of years, we slowly went back to the clinic, and we're very conservative. We went with people who were at high risk for heart attacks, people with very high blood cholesterol, and had already had a heart attack, or had obvious coronary heart disease. And in those patients showed that we had a dramatic, a very nice reduction in blood cholesterol and low-density lipoprotein, and a slight increase in the high-density lipoprotein, and ultimately went to the FDA with the data, and the FDA was convinced enough that this was safe and effective, that they approved that the drug should be used in patients with high blood cholesterol and coronary heart disease. So you had to have both. You had to have heart disease already and high blood cholesterol, and so that's the way the story started. Some doctors appreciated and believed the epidemiology and the proof that cholesterol is probably bad. Others said, look, you're reducing cholesterol. How do you know you're doing any good to health? And so there was a good deal of skepticism, as not a bad thing. But Merck was moving right along. Simvastatin was the second one, and they elected to do a long-term, a 5-year study with simvastatin, which was called Zocor. That is the trade name. And that study was done in patients who, again, had some evidence of coronary disease. But now 4,400 people were tested for 5 years. Half of them were put on simvastatin, half were put on a placebo, FAKE. And at the end of 5 years, when they looked at the results, they were stunning. There was an overall reduction in death from any cause of 30%, a reduction in death from heart attacks of 43%, reduction in need for hospitalization of 37%, and in addition, a reduction in the incidence of strokes, because arteries, of course, narrow not only in the heart, but also in the brain. And so it was just absolutely stunning. It was a home run type of result. And immediately the hypothesis, the cholesterol hypothesis, had become the fact. And so, so people started to believe, and then it became best practice to take people who had heart disease, coronary heart disease, or any kind of sign of disease of the arteries, and lower their blood cholesterol. The next series of studies was in patients who did not have heart disease, but had high blood cholesterol, and the results, these again were 5-year studies, the results at the end of that time, so you can see we're stretching out time, were very similar. Again, reduction in overall mortality, reduction in death from heart attacks, etc. And the last series, which was ended only very recently, was patients who had type 2 diabetes, who have a very high probability of having coronary heart disease and death from heart attacks. That happens in people with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. These people did not have high blood cholesterol. And so these people were taken, and half of them were put on simvastatin, Zocor, and the other half on placebo. And again, the same kind of result. Reduction in death, reduction in heart attacks, reduction in strokes. Well, the story has, by that time, of course, there are several statins. Lipitor is one, Zocor is another. There are probably 4 or 5 that are on the market. They all are relatively similar. They're all exactly the same mechanism of action. They all have low incidence of side effects, which can be watched after by physicians. So they're thought to be very safe, and of course they have revolutionized the treatment of coronary heart disease. Well, that demonstration in the laboratory, of course, turned on everybody to that kind of research. And so Merck research went from doing just the HMG-CoA reductase to antibiotics, to drugs for high blood pressure, to drug for glaucoma, to drug for Parkinson's disease, and the company just grew like crazy. And it was just a terrific run of things, and things that were good for health. And so the company became the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, had the largest market share. And during this reign of wonderful things that were happening within the company, things came out of research that could obviously go further than just the developed world. And I thought I would tell you about a couple of incidents there. One of them was the area of a disease called river blindness. And this is a disease which occurs in many parts of the world, but principally in sub-Saharan Africa. And here there are about 18 million people who are infected with a parasite. The parasite is called Onchocerca volvulus. There are over 100 million people who are at risk for this because they live in the region, and the disease goes like this. The disease is caused by a parasite, which is a worm. The worm exists in two forms, adults and babies, which are called microfilaria. The microfilaria are found in the skin of people who are infected. And the black fly, the vector, which breeds along rivers, that's why the name river blindness, bites someone who has this infection. And they pick up this microscopic little parasite. Within the fly, the microfilaria undergoes development. So when the fly bites somebody else, the form that is injected can now become an adult. If they don't go through the fly, they cannot mature and become an adult. But once they are an adult, they are injected into the skin. The males get to be about 6 or 8 inches long. The females about 15 inches long. They live together in lumps in the skin, and they make millions, if not billions, of microfilaria, which crawl all through the skin, causing enormous itching. And so these people, from the time they're 10 years old, can only remember that they itch all the time. And they scratch themselves, and their skin is denuded from the constant scratching and the healing of the scratching. But in addition, these little microfilaria get into the eyes and cause inflammation, and then it starts to heal and causes scar tissue, and the eyes become eventually completely blind. So in villages, in some villages in sub-Saharan Africa, 25% of adults are completely blind. And so it's a devastating thing. And the people, of course, have figured out that the closer you are to the river, the more likely you are to be infected. And so they pull away from the rivers and they go to the less fertile areas. So it has not only a personal effect, but an economic effect, because people are moving away from the place where they get more food. And so it's a dreadful situation. Well, early in the time that I went to Merck, a drug called ivermectin was discovered by our Merck team. And we had a very, very good parasitologist, Bill Campbell, who figured out what this drug was. Ivermectin is a macrolide which is able to kill parasites. It can kill all kinds of parasites, he discovered. It was incredibly potent. It was unlike anything ever seen by man before that. It again came from a soil microorganism. And this substance that was made would kill essentially all worms that were in animals. But it would not kill either hookworms or other important worms of humans. And therefore, it was put on the shelf and was not going to be used for human parasites. Instead, it was developed for parasites of first cattle, then horses, then sheep and pigs, and finally dogs. That if any of you have dogs that you give a drug to once a month, does anybody have a dog? Yeah, and you give it a drug once a month. That's ivermectin. Okay, and that's for heartworm.
Yes.
And so it is. So it's a fabulous drug. In fact, it's so interesting that if you were to go into a pasture in the summer and give half the cattle a shot of ivermectin and the other half give nothing to, and then come back in a week, you would find those that had received the ivermectin would have a nice clean hide, shiny, and the others would have sores where they had been bitten by insects. Well, this drug not only kills all the worms on the inside, but it also kills biting flies and biting insects. So it's an incredible compound. So we had this, and in 1981, it went on the market for all kinds of animals, and that was good news. But within the company, we had Bill Campbell who continued to study this drug, and he found that it has a specific effect against microfilaria in horses. And he was looking around to see what could this be used in humans. And there was another guy by the name of Muhammad Aziz. Muhammad had been in sub-Saharan Africa with the World Health Organization. And there he had seen river blindness. So he came to me and he said, Roy, he told me about the disease about which I knew nothing at the time. And he said, this drug might work in river blindness. I said, okay. He said, what? I said, why don't you go ahead to Africa and test it out? So we made some up in tablets, and he went off to Dakar in Senegal. And there he found a number of people who were obviously infected, although lightly infected, because we didn't want people who were about to die to give a new drug to. So these were lightly infected people. And he took half of them, and he took this pinch of skin over the hip, and he teased out this little piece of skin, and then counted the number of microfilaria. And he found that there are many dozens per little pinch. So these people were literally totally infested. And so he gave half of them one tablet, and the other half actually a placebo. Came back in a month, and he took another pinch of skin from the other side, and again, counted the number of worms. And those who had received the placebo had the same number of worms they had before. Those who had received the drug had not. But they had only received one dose, one tablet. And so we got very excited about that. There were no side effects. So we called the World Health Organization folks together, and they visited us at Merck in Rahway, my favorite place. We sat around the table, and we explained to them excitedly these results, and they said, well, he said, you're killing the microfilaria, you're not killing the adult. But we knew we were not killing the adult. But we pointed out that the disease, the problems, were due to the microfilaria, which were in the skin and the eyes. The adults, we couldn't worry about. They said, well, that was bad. And secondly, we were lightly infected people. And when we got into the real thing out in the field, we would see lots of side effects. But we didn't really believe that, because some of the people were pretty heavily infected. And thirdly, they said that they had arranged for a small fleet of planes, which were going to fly over the rivers and spray insecticide, larvicide, and that they were going to take care of it. We shouldn't worry about it. But we knew that the flies were already getting resistant to the spray. But nevertheless, they wanted to go on spraying. So we assured them that they should go on spraying, and we were going to go on with our work. And so they left, and we turned on a very large development program at that time, knowing full well that the people that we were going to be treating were among the poorest in the world. So we worked for between 1981 and 1987. During that period, we treated thousands of patients. We found it was completely safe. And the beauty of it is that if you go into a village and you give people a tablet and then take a skin snip in a month, 2 months, 6 months, or 12 months, you find that the worms are all gone. The parasites are literally eliminated by one dose once per year.
Wow.
And so we had what was almost a magical drug. And so the excitement within Merck, of course, is rising all the time. And but we don't know quite how we're going to market it. Our marketing people have full confidence that we'll figure out how to do this. So they say, $1 a year, that's not going to be a lot of money. we went around and talked to the governments in these places. $1 a year was out of the question. How about $0.50? How about 10 cents? You got to a point where it really didn't matter what the price was going to be. So we then went to governments, and we tried various governments, and they all said that blindness, that's a minor thing in these places. They've got bigger problems to worry about. And so we went to the U.S. government. I went to the U.S. government, and I went first to John Whitehead, who was Deputy Secretary of State at the time. And I told him the story. He got very excited about it. Turned to his aide, who was in the office with us, and said, we got to do this program. And my suggestion, of course, was that the government buy it from Merck at essentially a cost, very low price, and plant the American flag around Sub-Saharan Africa. I walked out of the office, and the aide said, Dr. Vagelos is very excited, but we don't have any money in the budget. I said, we're talking about, building up to about 20 million a year, maybe 5 years from now, but we started very small numbers. But you don't understand, we're broke. I said, oh. So I went, the next stop was the chief of staff in the White House, Donald Regan, and I gave him the same story. He became even more excited. Turned to his aide, said, we got to do this. We walked out, same thing. They were broke too. So it turned out the U.S. government was broke. They could not do this. And so, but now it's mid-1987. We're having, every meeting we have, how are we going to get this drug out there? The company is growing like crazy with our drugs in the developed world. And suddenly we hear from the people in Paris that tomorrow we are going to have the drug approved. Now, why Paris? It was Paris because the French were in French Africa, and a number of them had river blindness, even living in Paris. And so they knew the disease. Their regulatory agency knew the disease. The FDA did not. They would not take the file. So we had filed in France, and they had quickly, much quicker than the French would ever do anything. So they told us it was going to be tomorrow. We had a quick setup. We had to make a decision, and we called we're going to have to announce it. All of Merck was waiting to hear, and so there was a quick meeting of the people who worked with me, and we decided and announced in Washington the next day that Merck would contribute the drug, ivermectin, to anyone in the world who needed it for as long as it would be needed. Now, the effect was almost electric within the company because things were really flying high. People had very high expectations of the company. But the letters that I received was, we love Merck, we love working at Merck, we think it's a great company, we never thought we would do something this good. But I will tell you, I had many, many letters from stockholders as well, and their response was pretty much the same kind of thing. Not one negative letter. So it was quite an amazing thing. Now, when we made this decision as a group, we probably didn't envision how the total repercussions. We had concerns. What effect would it have on other companies who are working on developing world diseases? Would they feel that they're being pushed to have to make contributions because Merck has done it? Merck was by far the biggest company in the world at that time in pharmaceuticals. And so we worried about a negative effect there. Of course, we worried initially about the effect on our stockholders. We're concerned about the effect on pricing of our drugs. If we can give away drugs, how come we have to charge $1 a day for something someplace? And so all those concerns went through our mind, and in the long run, we came down with the decision that we did. The long-term effect on Merck was that the positive impact on our scientists and the people who were involved in drug discovery was such that we could essentially recruit anybody we wanted to the Merck Research Laboratories. I mean, it was such a positive thing that we probably got 20 years benefit. But what happened? What was the result? Well, in the year, of course, I retired in 1994. The program started in 1987, so I was not there throughout its history. But in the year 2003, 35 million people were treated by Merck completely free. Now, the World Health Organization, who had walked out on this initially, had come back when they realized how exciting the program was. They felt they could not be left out of this program, so they came back and worked very hard with us within the program. So when it came time for distribution, their clinics were available to help us in the distribution. A number of foundations came in with us. Ultimately, the World Bank gave a large amount of money, 125 million, in fact, to help in the distribution. But throughout the program, the drug was completely free from Merck, and it's going very well. Now, in addition, we looked at other microfilarial diseases, and some of you would know about elephantiasis. And that is a different parasite. It also has a microfilarial form. It's making me nervous sitting here. So elephantiasis is another microfilarial disease, and that microfilaria is also sensitive to ivermectin, so they started treating that a number of years ago. It's caused by Wuchereria bancrofti. It's called lymphatic filariasis. And in the year 2003, 25 million people were treated for elephantiasis. So in that year, Merck treated 35 million and 25 million, a total of 60 million people were treated completely free by the company, and it's wonderful. But the distribution was, and I omitted saying this, was helped enormously by a group under Dr. Bill Fahey. We said, when we're going to distribute it, how will we know that there's a group that is capable of handling the BIDI, which was world-class parasitologists, who received applications from villages and cities and places, and would make sure that they could keep track of who took the drug, this infection. Barry Blumberg in 1963, a physician anthropologist working in Australia, had identified what was called the Australian antigen. That is a protein that was found in blood of Australian Aborigines. And he came back to the US and he studied this thing and ultimately determined that it was a surface particle, a surface antigen from the surface of the hepatitis B virus. And Morris Hilleman at Merck determined that he would isolate this particle, which was a piece of the hepatitis B virus, and he did that from homosexual and intravenous drug user blood from the Bowery in New York City. He isolated this thing and demonstrated first in chimpanzees that it was immunogenic, and it would cause an antibody to be risen, and the antibody was protective. So you could vaccinate a chimpanzee and then challenge it with a live virus, and the chimp would not become infected. So it looked like he had a real winner, and he undertook to purify tons of blood that he collected from these people, and took many years to do all the safety, and then we did a study of 3,000 high-risk individuals over 9 years, and demonstrated that in fact it essentially protected greater than 95%. So it was a vaccine that was going to be terrific, and it was completely safe. And so in 1981, we undertook to market this vaccine. And the vaccine, interestingly, when I first went to Merck, the vaccine business was sort of undergoing scrutiny because it wasn't at all profitable. They did a business study of it. They assigned a good business person to determine exactly the future of the vaccine business, and the response was that they recommended that we close it down. By that time, there were only 6 companies in vaccine work and doing research, having started at 20, about 25 years ago, but because of pricing issues and liability issues, everybody had gotten out of it, was leaving the business. Merck took this head on. The CEO came to me and said, you know, we should get out of the business, and I convinced him, it was not hard, that we had a very important vaccine coming. And he said, well, what can we charge, you know, $10, $15 is all we get for a vaccine. And being a good research person, I said, $100. He said, $100 for a vaccine? I said, yes, $100. He said, well, anyway, they decided not to close down the business. We finished the vaccine, and that's in 1981, just before we were going to put it on the market, we had a very vast marketing study to tell us what the price should be. And they went off work for 6 months, came back and recommended $100. So I immediately recognized that I had a talent for this. So we went on the market for this, and all of you will remember what 1981 was. That was the beginning of AIDS. And where is this vaccine being derived from? People with the same high. So people feared, and rightfully, that you're taking a product from people who have otherwise have a disease. And we don't know what the cause of that disease. 1981, the virus hadn't been identified. It looked like a viral disease, but everybody was going to look like everybody was dying. And did you want to take a vaccine when we don't know what even causes it? So the sales went. It was never taken off the market, but the sales just stopped. Several years before that, Bill Rutter came to visit the labs, and he suggested that we might collaborate in making a protein by recombinant technology. And so we started a project at that time, putting the gene first into coli, Escherichia coli, which didn't work very well. Then we got together with Ben Hall, who was at the University of Washington. Bill Rutter was at UCSF, University of California in San Francisco. And we worked together, and they put the genes in, we extracted the protein and isolated the vaccine, and ultimately made a vaccine that was produced in baker's yeast. So it had no virus associated with it. It was completely safe. We did the same studies in chimps and humans, and in 1984 had a vaccine that was completely safe and was made from baker's yeast. Although this was initially only going to be used for high-risk people, ultimately it's a vaccine that's used in all children in the United States and in the developed world. But in the developing world, as we looked around again, we saw that in China, 13% of the population are carriers of hepatitis B. And one of the top causes of death in China and other parts of Asia is hepatitis B. And what happens here is that the incidence is so high that the transmission occurs at birth. And that is, the mothers are infected, 13%. When they have a baby, the infant, within a couple of days, is infected, probably through the milk. And experiments were done early in Taiwan, which demonstrated that if you immunize an infant right after birth, that they do not become infected. Now, the reason that the disease is so bad in China is that they have it so long. Instead of getting it when they're 30 or 40 years old, they get it when they're 2 days old. And so when they're 30 or 40, they're getting primary liver cancer. So hepatitis B is right up there with cigarette smoking as a carcinogen. And so these people are dying from chronic liver disease or primary liver cancer. 80% of liver cancer that originates in the liver is due to this virus. And so now we have a vaccine that can interrupt this thing that's leading to one of the top causes of death in China. And the Chinese, this is in the mid to late 80s, say they cannot afford. Of course, it wasn't an expensive vaccine. We're talking about $100. And even at very, very reduced prices, that they could not afford the vaccine. So we looked to see how we could do this, and we came up with what we call technology transfer. And we were going to teach the Chinese how to make this vaccine, and we told them they had to pay us something. So ultimately, we negotiated while people were continuing to get hepatitis B for a couple of years, and ultimately we agreed that $7 million they would pay us, one-time payment. And for that, the Chinese chemical engineers came to the Merck plant, and with equipment that they purchased themselves, they were taught over a year how to produce this vaccine, how to manufacture it. And at the end of that time, they took the plants, took the equipment apart, and shipped it to both Beijing and Shenzhen, up in the north and in the south, and with a capacity to produce vaccine to immunize 20 million infants per year, which is their birth cohort of China. And the second of two plants was finished in 1993. We spent far more than the $7 million that we charged them, which they did pay, for the technology transfer, because in the end, our engineers all went to China to help them build these two plants. That was a very successful cooperation, and the end result was that China was set up. Merck did not collect a single dollar after that initial one-time payment, but what they had was produce a organization in China which could take care of hepatitis B for their population. Now, you'd say, why the heck is Merck doing these things? You know, all these other companies are making money and difficulty, and we have, and the answer is that there was this deep feeling at Merck that they had a technology, and it was almost, you know, I hesitate to, and I've used it before, it's almost a magical feeling that the Merck people could do what they were asked to do. And I really felt that way, not only among our research people, but among our manufacturing people. They could actually almost do impossible things when asked, and it was only a matter of asking. And therefore, the company had to respond in some responsible way, and that was our way of doing it. We were very successful as a company, otherwise we could not have done that. And so it was a wonderful response, and then we had the issue of HIV, and you all know the story of that. I just told you at the beginning of 1981, nobody knew what was the cause of AIDS. The virus was then identified. A whole series of, there was a wonderful series of experiments that first identified the virus between people at the Pasteur Institute, at the NIH, and then between work at universities, small companies, large companies. A series of drugs were invented, first reverse transcriptase inhibitors, then protease inhibitors, and even later drugs. And it was found early that the virus becomes very resistant very quickly, and so combinations of drugs have to be put together. Very high price, but tremendous value derived from these drugs. Because a disease that is otherwise 100% lethal is converted to a chronic infection that you can take care of by taking combinations of drugs. And you get out of the hospital, you don't die. You get out of the hospital, you go back to work, you live a pretty normal life. That was the fabulous response of the industry, universities, working together, getting this done, and government to get it approved, get things done as quickly as possible. Optimal result. What happened in the developing world? What happened in Africa? Somehow, the industry felt that they could not handle the effect on a low-price policy that would be so large on the developed world, because they felt they had to protect their prices, they had to protect their patents, and therefore there was no motion, there was no effort to get the HIV drugs that were fabulously successful in the developed world to the poor of the developing world for several years, with mounting anger in the American people, which was then helped by the company in India that started to make generic drugs and started to ship into the poor areas of Africa at very much lower prices, which ultimately, between the anger in the U.S. among Americans and the obvious fact that an Indian company could put in drugs at low prices, finally caused the industry to turn around. But the effect on the reputation of the industry will be several years before it's repaired, because all these major companies that had resisted reducing their prices then came around and did wonderful programs, which they're going around discussing. And so now they're going around as though nothing, that this is a wonderful thing that we can do, but it was several years before they started, and therefore they have a very bad reputation at the moment, which they deserve, I would say. But it will take a while to bring it around, and ultimately, because of the continued productivity of the research industry, I think they will get people to understand that the pharmaceutical biotech industry will continue to transform health, both in the developed world and with a couple of bruises that now have been taken over the recent past. I think they will start thinking more about how to get drugs and vaccines to the developing world as well. So I thank you for this opportunity to tell you this.
I think we have a few minutes for questions. Let me just start by asking Ray, you spent a good part of your life as a very prominent leader in a world with a lot of public policy issues, the medical and healthcare and pharmaceutical world. And what as you look out on the landscape today, what are the maybe 2 or 3 public policy issues in those worlds that loom largest to you, where maybe courageous decisions are needed to put us on a different track?
Well, there are 2 that in the health area that I have been very concerned about. One, which is directly related to drugs, and that is I think everyone should have access to drugs in America. I think everybody should be on a plan that provides optimal drugs, because drugs are the best way to take care of disease. And we all know what drugs can accomplish. We know what's happened in the last 50 years with both longevity of life and the quality of life that we have. And so to have pockets of our population that don't have access to good drugs I think is nuts. And therefore a program which looks to get drugs. We know that people who are very poor on Medicaid can get drugs. We know that the rich can get, the working people can get drugs, but there are working people who are not insured. And the lower people in the low-paying jobs are often not insured and don't have access to drugs. And we just have to have plans to take care of, to see that drugs are available to everyone. And there should be plans to do that, including Medicare. And to my amazement, part of the industry was for a while opposed to plans for getting drugs within Medicare. Medicare, yes. But that I think is moving in the right direction, although it could be broader. So that's important. Secondly, but related, have everybody insured. I mean, we must have health insurance for everybody in this country. I mean, as developed as we are, and as wealthy a nation as we are, there are people who are, again, people at not at the very bottom, but in the middle. They're at the bottom of the middle who are working and who have no health insurance, which I think is a terrible thing. And we've got to, I think those are 2 policy things that are related that we've just got to get done to optimize the impact of modern medicine and on health on Americans. We've just got to do that.
To follow up on that, my name is Lizzie Sharp, and I'm here at the Kent Book My name is Elizabeth Sharp. I'm here at the Kennedy School doing international development.
Yeah.
And to follow up on that, a lot of people, actually if you talk to some employers, they would say, well, we're dropping insurance of our employees because our insurance is skyrocketing. Well, our insurance is skyrocketing, if you talk to the insurers, because of drug prices. How do you respond to that? I mean, this seems like a direct
Good.
link.
No, that's a great question. How about drug prices? The pricing of the statins in 1987 was such, and it's gone up sort of incrementally because of inflation, or annual increases. It's gone up annually, but today you can get a statin for about $1,000 at retail for anybody to buy that. Now, many of the drugs, of the modern drugs, whether they're for high blood pressure or peptic ulcer or glaucoma, are relatively well priced. They're priced according to value, and my way of pricing drugs says that do you keep people alive out of hospitals, at work, quality of life, and how do you feel when one of your friends comes up to you at a cocktail party and says, geez, did you see the pricing? How do you feel about the price of one of your drugs? Are they affordable? I would say the great majority of medicines in the United States, although we are the highest priced country in the world, the great majority of the prices are fair, and they get terrific value, just terrific. But we've had some outliers, exceptions, and some rather recent ones. I told you what a statin could do over 5 years, a 30% reduction in overall mortality and 43% reduction in death from heart attack. From a couple of the recent cancer drugs, which are priced at $40,000 per person on top of the chemotherapy that they're taking, then you add 40,000, you get on the average 4 months of additional life. I think that's excessive. I think pricing of that sort is going to induce price regulation in this country. And it's got to be moderated. It cannot go on. But there are a number of instances, relatively recent, which are really going to cause a lot of damage to the industry. The other thing that's happening in pricing is that annual price increases were forbidden by the U.S. government during the late 70s and early 80s. There were no price increases in the pharmaceutical industry allowed. And then the government did away with that regulation. And prices, therefore, started going up to try to catch up with the losses to inflation over the years that the price increases were prevented, were not permitted. And so each of the companies then had annual price increases. By the time I became CEO, I became aware of these price increases and started asking questions because they were higher than the consumer price index increase. And so the response was that, well, we're catching up. But by the time I really got onto it, what was going on, I asked them to show me where we were in relation to the beginning, the losses we had, the consumer price index. And it turned out that we had actually caught up that year. And so we proposed and we agreed that Merck from then on would increase prices only at the level of the increase in the consumer price index. That was about 1990. And because of our size in the market, although we didn't talk with the others because you can't do that, all the other companies fell in behind us. So the whole industry so high. Well, it's the other way around, and that is a price is determined for the U.S., and then each company tries to get a U.S. price in the rest of the world, and they fail because there's price regulation. Governments decide on prices of prescription drugs in every other part of the world. And so the prices are 30 to 50% lower in other countries, including Canada. And that's why you have busloads of older people going to Canada picking up their prescription drug, which I think is awful. But they have to do that. what can we do about that? Well, we certainly can't dictate that other countries raise their prices. Why do companies accept lower prices in other countries? And that is they have, every company, Merck has a Merck of France and Germany. Well, but the government will only give you 50% of the price, and ultimately you compromise and you do it. Because the cost of the tablet is a small percent of the overall price. And so selling it at less money, what you're doing is limiting the amount of money that goes into research and development. And so as it turns out, Americans pay for most of the R&D, research and development costs, for discovery of new drugs. And so it's vital and important that the U.S. continue to have free pricing, although moderated, so that it's fair and within value. If the industry were forced to have prices in the U.S. at the level that we receive on the average in Europe or the rest of the world, there'd be much, much less investment in R&D. And so it's a tight situation. What could help this? And that is lower price in another country, and ultimately put real pressure on the rest of the world. But it's going to have to be a very, very exciting product and a very strong company. That Americans cannot be forced to carry all the costs of R&D.
Can I just pick up on that? Do you have any order of magnitude for the sums of money? It sounds like Americans are implicitly subsidizing the rest of the world, particularly the developing world, without it showing up on anyone's aid budgets.
I really cannot give you any order of magnitude of cost. I know that the cost to Merck is I know we passed 200 million in the river blindness program many years ago, and if you can imagine contributing drugs to 60 million patients a year, I've seen the estimate at $1.50 a person. But I can't corroborate that. But $1.50 times 60 is what Merck did in 2003. And so it's enormous. I don't know whether that's real. But whatever it is, these are large numbers, and they're coming right out of profits. And is that right? Should every company have a philanthropic budget, a charity budget? I think every successful company should. But I don't know what it should be. What percent of the income, the earnings, ought to go to charity? It should be some number. Merck is way ahead. Others, I don't know where they are, but a lot is being done by the industry. I can't give you that. Go ahead.
What about the argument? I wanted to follow up on what that's actually said. That marketing costs are actually a larger percentage. They actually represent a very large percentage of the cost to pharmaceutical companies. It's not just the R&D component, but that, and it also creates a side effect, which is consumer demand. The ongoing advertising for consumers like myself, everyone else in this room, we ask our doctors, what about that one? What of that argument, that marketing is this larger component?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question again, and I could have given you come to my lecture this afternoon, actually. I cover all these topics at MIT. Marketing is a huge problem because the numbers that you use, the marketing and sales, the promotion of a drug, promotion at a company, when I was CEO, was about equivalent to the cost of R&D. Promotion, it's doubled since I left. So now it's 2 times the cost of R&D. And what has happened? That is, there has been a proliferation of the sales force. And that is the average sales detail person who goes to see a doctor waits for 2 hours to see the doctor for 2 minutes. Gives him trinkets and lunch in order to be a favorite of the doctor, and to get more, maybe 2.5 minutes, and leave samples. Incredibly inefficient. And then you have the direct-to-consumer advertising, which I just like. which has entered the field in the last, I guess, strongly in the last 5 years, both print and television. And who could have missed the importance of erectile dysfunction in Cialis over the Super Bowl? I mean, that cost has been added there. So what has happened in the last decade is the sales forces have doubled. And on top of that, we have added direct-to-consumer advertising. We need a new paradigm for transmitting information to doctors. With what I explained to you on the importance of statins in control of cholesterol and other drugs that are going to be available for cholesterol. Turns out that probably only about half of Americans who have a cholesterol problem are being treated. And it is a fact, what you said, that you go to a doctor when you see something and say, hey doc, how about, they respond.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of doctors out there that are so busy that they do very little reading, and they're really, I mean, being a physician now and taking care of a lot of patients is not a great job. It's very, very tough. They're pressed by their organizations to see lots of patients for short periods of time. They don't get time to read, and they have a little bit of relief by visiting with the detail person who gives them a nice sandwich or a pizza or something. And that's where they get a lot of their information. And so we need a new way to get the information to the doctors that they will listen and learn about new drugs. And I think, I was discussing this with some friends last evening, and it is in my book as a suggestion also. I want to unabashedly promote my book because all the profits go to student scholarships. So buy a book if you would. I lost my train of thought.
You were discussing that problem.
Oh yes, we were talking about who could do this. Thank you. I would just see whether you were listening. And that is a company, a small company that doesn't have a sales force and has an important new drug. Could think of new ways. Here we are in information time to approach doctors and arrange to get doctors together under prearranged conditions where one can collect large groups with real specialists, physician specialists, who know the product and who have worked with the product to give the information and do it in a very good way and probably 10% of the cost. And so, but we've got to get to that. It's going to take a revolution. Like we've had a revolution in drug discovery, there will be revolutions in every other part of the industry. It's going to change dramatically. Yeah.
A quick question. Because of your leadership, your company really did a lot to the developing country, and it's very respectable. My question is, what's your view on some of the developing countries that are violating IPR or the patents of those drugs, which can cure like HIV/AIDS or those emergent disease for their countries? Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, what was the question?
What's your view
Oh, my view.
on the countries violating IPR and
Yeah. Well, that's, we worried about that when we gave the technology for hepatitis B vaccine to the Chinese. And we were assured that they would not sell the product to the rest of the world because there are no patents out there. And that's a constant concern, and you just have to take the risks. That's life. The life is filled with risks, and you're looking at the benefits at all times. Patents are absolutely crucial for the industry. Without patents, there's no protection of your intellectual contribution. And so everybody will make your discovery and put it on the market when you do. And so we've got to have intellectual protection, and intellectual property protection is vital to the research industry. I think what will happen as each country becomes more developed and starts to have their own research, and we saw this in Japan in the 70s. Japan had no patents at all in the early 70s. Then as their industry started to beef up and become stronger, they wanted to protect their industry rights. And so they passed a strong patent law at that time. I think in time it's going to happen in China, because the Chinese are very smart and they're starting to build an industry. You're going to see it in India ultimately. And, you know, the worst of the pirates were in India. And so I think as the world develops, that problem will take care of itself. In the meantime, it's a big risk.
I have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Karen Griffin. I'm a PhD student in health policy here at Harvard. And I had the great fortune of delivering ivermectin tablet last summer in Togo. My question is specifically about the Mectizan evolution. So, you know, early 1980s, Mectizan's on market, takes till late 80s for it to be approved for human use. In the context of this talk in terms of leadership, I'm wondering if you can comment about what was really driving that evolution within Merck. I mean, ex post, it's really easy to look back and say, well, it was great, you know, we were able to attract people to the company, we get good PR and all these kinds of things, but is that something that companies really see before? I mean, I assume at some point there was still this belief that there would be a market for this, and when does that belief of a market dissipate and, you know, reasons to believe in drug development for other reasons come online?
Well, with Mectizan, which is what the human use formulation is for ivermectin, was developed for river blindness, I knew right up front when we started that we weren't going to be able to sell that drug. But our marketing people were enthusiastic, and who wants to turn off enthusiasm? But we knew full well that we were going to develop this drug. And we also knew full well that we were going to have to get it out there somehow. I thought that we would be able to entice governments to get into it with us. And I could hardly believe that our government would not get involved. Here's where I think the pharmaceutical industry screwed up in the HIV program. The need was so obvious for Africa, for HIV drugs, that it was a moment in time when the industry was really on the peak of having made these marvelous new discoveries that were being made available in the developed world, where they could have gone to our government and said, look, we would like to collaborate and come up with some kind of programs, but you are going to have to help with the infrastructure so that when we go into a country, there will be a program which people will, because these are complex programs, we need to have both prevention of infection as well as distribution of drugs and care of these patients because they have other problems as well. But we'd like to become partners. I think that could have happened had the industry taken a leadership position and gone to the government at that time. And the government, they just blew it at that time. So your question, when do you, you can look back and say, yes, it has helped in recruiting. We certainly didn't think about that when we made the decision. We made the decision because we had the technology to do something big in drugs and in disease, and by God, we're going to do it. Okay,
I'd
thanks a
like to
lot.
say that what a privilege it's been to have you with us today, and you can see that people are still sitting at the edge of their seats, so I hope that you'll come back and spend more time with us. And thank you for everyone coming today. Thank you for all.